All right, welcome to Finally Seen. Today's guest is Amber Powers. She's the best-selling author of a powerful memoir called Untethered, Tales of a Modern-Day Alice. And in that book, Amber unpacks her journey of leaving behind the cult-like religious structure she was raised in to reclaim her voice and rewrite her story. Amber is a multi-passionate entrepreneur and has helped thousands of women build their brands and find their own authentic voices. Amber's story is one of bold detachment, deep healing, and business with soul. If you've ever felt like you had to hide parts of who you are to succeed, this conversation will remind you what's possible when you choose to be fully seen. Amber Powers, welcome, 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 my friend. I'm so happy you're here.
Chrissy, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. You and I have been in the same, I guess, sphere for what, a decade or so, maybe? I don't know.
Really close to that. Yeah,
It feels like we've gone through hairstyles
I
and
know, exactly.
all sorts of things. So I'm so happy you're joining me. And you've got your book. Obviously, your book very much aligns with the whole theme of this podcast, Finally Seen, because Finally Seen is both for personally and in business. And I think your message perfectly aligns with that. I want to start off by asking you about the whole Alice in Wonderland thing, because your book is actually titled Untethered, Tales of a Modern Day Alice. So what the heck does that mean?
So, as a young child, I became, I wouldn't say obsessed, but just enthralled, I think,
That's
with Alice in Wonderland. There was something about her story that just resonated deeply with me. I understood her. I didn't want to be her. I understood her, but I didn't even know fully why until honestly, I'm still discovering reasons about why she aligned with me so perfectly as a child. And it's allowed me to understand more fully who I am as an adult.
interesting. That's interesting that you took a cartoon and turned it, you were able to figure out yourself. But I guess it makes sense because one of the things that I've recently talked to people about is fiction and how fiction can actually help us with our own emotional intelligence because we get to see how the characters develop and then we relate it to ourselves. So I guess it makes perfect sense. It's really
Yeah.
not that crazy.
Yeah,
But
absolutely, for sure. As a young girl, the first version of Alice I saw was, I think, in 1985. It was an all-star cast with Sammy Davis Jr.
wow. Oh,
I
I think I
mean,
remember that.
everyone was in this, and you can find it free on YouTube if anybody wants to know. I still watch it to this day, and it brings me a lot of joy. And it was a really long movie, which as a child, I'm sure anybody with young children, they know, like, you can't keep attention for very long. You could not pull me away from the television. I just kept connecting. And every time I was sick, I stayed home, laid on the couch, ate chicken noodle soup, and popped in Alice in Wonderland. We recorded it off of the television, so it was always handy.
That's amazing. Wow. That's pretty cool. I think I remember seeing that particular version of it. And you're right. That was a long time ago. Wow.
Yeah, for sure. I
Um,
told the age.
so, I know you wrote this book about leaving your cult-like upbringing. At what point did you realize, hey, this isn't like what all my friends are experiencing? And when did you discover that your environment was different?
Different. Yeah. The first memory I have of being different was in first grade. I noticed that most of the little girls had their ears pierced, and I did not, and I could not. And so when I went home and asked to get my ears pierced, my dad promptly told me, "We don't put holes in the temple of God."
Yes.
And I was like, but they're Christians too. Why do they get to have their ears pierced and I can't? And of course, you can't really explain that to a 6-year-old, but I couldn't logically reason why we were different, but I could tell that we were.
Okay, interesting. And
Yeah.
so I know that there is a connection that your family has with the Jonestown murders, massacre situation. I mean, just
Mhm.
awful situation.
Yeah.
Did you learn about that growing up, or was that when you were an adult that you learned that?
Um, there were whispers of it. I didn't know what it meant. So
Okay,
I knew it was a big deal in our family. I had heard the term Jonestown thrown around, but I really didn't know what it meant. I was pretty sheltered. And until I would say probably my early to mid 20s, I finally discovered what that meant and learned how it impacted my family.
that's a lot to unpack for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, I know 20 as an adult and early 20s as an adult, but I mean, you and I both know, but
Yeah.
it's still pretty young
Yeah.
age for digesting that sort of stuff.
Sure.
And I know that you got pretty raw in this book,
Mhm.
and I know from having been, in your circle while you were writing it, I know there was a lot of struggle and kind of wrangling with what to put in the book, what not to put in the book. Tell me a little bit about that journey of,
Yeah.
one, remembering things yourself and kind of the catharsis that's there with writing that, but also the hard parts of it.
Yeah, for sure. So it's so interesting. And I was hoping that you would ask me this question. I was talking to a colleague earlier today who's also an author, and he was talking a little bit about his process in writing. And I shared with him, I said, ironically enough, my book is about finding your voice, finding who you are, and using that voice, being unashamed to just be who you are. And when I first, identified that I wanted to write a book, I was trying to hide. Essentially, the way I had proposed this book is it was going to be my stories, but told from the standpoint of Alice in Wonderland characters. So I was trying to hide my story in Alice in Wonderland. And my publisher kind of nudged me back onto path. And she said, "You understand how ironic it is that you want to help people find their voice and you don't want them to hide, but you're trying to do that very thing." And so that was the beginning for me of getting uncomfortable with being who I am so that I can get comfortable with who I am. And so, the whole process was probably the most painful thing I've ever gone through, to be honest with you, in all the best ways. Because anybody who knows the story of how a caterpillar becomes a butterfly knows that it's a violent one. But in the end, something beautiful and magical emerges. And I had to confront not necessarily people, that did happen in the process, and that was painful as well. But I had to confront times that I had suppressed, I had pushed down, I had buried for so, so, so long. Because the way that I was raised, you just got over it. Our doctrine was you just forgive and you forget. And anybody who knows anything about the brain or trauma knows that is a fallacy. Forgiveness does not mean healing. And this process for me was incredibly healing. I got to validate my own emotions as an abused child in multiple ways, right? Um, and then I got to see how those traumas impacted me and formed me into the adult that I am today. And it allowed me to go through this beautiful process of healing both my inner child and my inner teenager and my inner 20-year-old, all the way through to the woman that I am today. And I am so eternally grateful to just the process. It was magical in all of the worst ways.
I get that because I've worked on several books for myself as well, and one of them is I've gone back and forth between making it a memoir type thing or making it fiction, and it's kind of for that very same reason that you were talking about. And it's like as I was writing, I've got 36,000 words in the one I'm referencing, and as I was writing that one, it's amazing the things that you're like, oh, I forgot all about that, but whoa, that was big.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, how did you decide what to keep in the book and what to not put in the book?
Yeah. So with my publisher, God love them. It was a process. I remember my first draft was 20,000 words, and my response was, "Great job. Those are words."
It's like
But I
funny. That's like bless your heart.
Yeah, exactly. But I needed to just get something on paper. It was a starting point, and that's what I was missing. So For anybody who has ever attempted anything big in life, you know that you just have to start. That is the first and most enormous hurdle, is just starting. And so I did. I met my deadline of 20,000 words. I threw a whole bunch of stories onto a Google document, sent it over to my publisher, and that was the response. Oh, thank you. Good job. Those are words. We'll work with it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is great. Yeah, I mean, that's speaking to one of the purposes, or one of the things that I want people to get out of this podcast as well, is that you just have to get started. I remember I texted you and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm doing a podcast." Like, it just popped in my head. I'm doing it. And
Right.
it was kind of like that Mel Robbins 5-second rule thing, like, don't give yourself enough time to talk yourself out of it.
Right.
And, even though I had a podcast 10 years ago, having my own podcast again wasn't even on, like, not even anywhere in my thoughts.
Right.
And for it to just pop into my head like it did, I was like, okay, clearly this is a direction that I need to obey in this step. And
Right.
so, it's not going to be perfect from the beginning. It's okay. I'm just getting started, and the right people will hear the right messages, and that's really all that matters. And so, that's
Perfectionism will kill momentum every single time. Before I submitted that 20,000 word document, I remember going through and editing it for grammar and spelling. And my husband stopped me and he said, "You know, this is going to be very different from the final product, right? Stop."
yeah. That's one of the things I tell authors too, because I know that they struggle with getting that first iteration out.
Mhm.
And I always say, just vomit on the page, just get it
Exactly.
out.
Yep.
Do not self edit, get it out. You can edit later. But I have found as a writer that once you start that process and give yourself the permission to just vomit on the paper,
Yep.
it starts coming out literally, like, the words
Absolutely.
just flow. So yeah, kudos for you for
Thank
not
you.
just completely crashing when they said those are words.
I fully was aware.
That's hilarious. You hadn't told me that, so that's pretty. That's awesome. So, I know that you had some pushback from people within your circle, not necessarily family, but just people in your circle.
Mhm.
Um, what did you do, or how did you handle with that to kind of not let that sabotage you, or how did you, like, stay strong and say, no, this is part of my journey that I have to do?
It was so, I can't call it anything other than divinely orchestrated, to be honest with you. The whole entire process. When I say it was healing, that's truly what I meant. Um, my entire life, I was taught to obey and to be the good girl and to people please. And so when I wasn't fulfilling any of those roles, I would go into panic mode. Who am I if I'm not the good girl? Who am I if I'm not pleasing this person or that person? Who am I if I'm saying the thing that doesn't tickle their ears? Right. And so during the writing of this book is when my healing took place. And it wasn't until the book was about to be published that these obstacles were thrown at me.
Mm.
And they were really tests, I believe, of how much have you learned to love you?
Hmm.
How much have you learned that your voice truly matters? How much have you learned that you don't have to please people to the point of hurting yourself or, quieting your own voice? And so this was an exercise in boundaries and love, because I truly have learned to love people without allowing their toxicity to remain in my life. And a lot of people don't understand that. So that's when I would get the darts thrown at me. Well, you have to forgive and forget. I can forgive you. In fact, I forgave you many decades ago. Um, Forgetting I don't know how to forget, but what I do know is whatever happened, happened, and I still love you. But the way that you're showing up in my life is toxic, and that is not allowed. The way that you show up in my life causes me harm. I draw the boundary there. You're not allowed to do that. I will know if and when it's time to allow you back into my life. And other people did that to me, and that is perfectly fine. You know what I mean? Um, Now, my observation is those people didn't want to look into the mirror that I threw up when I wrote a book. That hurt a lot, but still, that's okay. They protected themselves. For whatever it is for them, their journey is their own. My business is my journey. And how I react to other people, how I show love, how I show up in the world. And so I'll just continue to do that.
I love that. It was making me think of, oh, it's one of the universal laws, and I can't remember which specific one, but it was essentially how you are keeping your side of the road clean,
Mhm.
and you are in control of you, and that's it.
Absolutely.
And you also made me think of, in the book you say the wizard didn't ask me to come closer. He told me to stay small.
Mhm.
I thought that was so poignant because I feel like that's what we have happened to us a lot. And I know that often our values get used behind us and this is something I'm discovering myself in doing all the shadow work, as they call it, with finding where the shadows of your values are actually being used against you.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was, with your people pleasing and all that. I feel like so many of us are having our values used against us in that, behind shadows.
Yeah, I think for women especially, for me and particularly because of the religious institution in which I was raised, women were seen, not heard. Women were guided. They didn't lead. They were the sheep. And that was set up very much on purpose. And, that wizard is behind a curtain and he's just as small as you are. He's just projecting a larger image, he's projecting a larger voice. And the fact of the matter is, when you show up as your most authentic self, your image is bigger than any projection of the wizard that could ever exist because nothing and no one can compare to you. And people who try to make you feel small, right? They know that. They know the most authentic version of you is going to scare them. They want to remain comfortable.
I,
You being bigger than makes them uncomfortable.
I like that. That's super powerful. And, I say that to people often, you can lead wherever you are. You don't have to be the head of anything. You can lead in any position in a small town, big town, just in your household.
Family.
Yeah, anywhere. And so showing up and actually being that leader or following everyone has a calling that we know we have. And so we just got to tap into that and allow ourselves to actually lead. You said something else that made me think. Um, it was the submission side of things.
Mhm.
So, because they called it submission, and I have here in my notes that you called it slow erasure. I'd like you to expand on that for sure.
Yeah. So essentially, they tried to butter it up and make it sound like it wasn't what it was, but submission essentially meant the man was the head of the house. He was to make all of the final decisions. And that slowly chips away at who you are until you're just this speck of a human. And then things start to set in like depression. And that's not to say that there isn't like a biochemical imbalance with people who are depressed. I truly believe that that is true. But in my case, depression set in once I realized I felt like this teeny tiny speck of a person that was going to implode. And I truly feel like the reason for that was I felt my expansiveness. I felt the possibility of expansion within myself and was given no canvas with which to expand. I couldn't under that rule.
Interesting. So you
Yeah.
felt like your calling was to be bigger,
Yeah.
and yet you were being told, no, that's wrong.
Yeah.
That's got to be really hard as a child and young adult to feel like you're called for something, but then also be told that you're wrong for feeling that way.
And it's so interesting, Chrissy, because as a child, I was always referred to as the old soul. I was always referred to as wise. You're so wise for your age. As a 16-year-old, I counseled adults out of divorce. Like I know things innately. And so to hear even from other people, them tell me, holy moly, you know a whole lot of things for how old you are, and to feel the potential there, right? There was the potential of expansion, but then in the same breath to be told, but we only want you to be this big by the same people. It was
Interesting.
very confusing.
I would imagine that is very confusing.
Yeah.
And I know you and I have talked about this offline, but I want the audience to know kind of what was it whenever you were like looking at your situation as a young adult and going, wait, this isn't what Christianity actually is. This isn't what my life should be. Because you had to give up a whole lot.
I did. It was progressive. There wasn't a moment where I just said, forget it, I'm done. There, I would say the first moment where I really questioned my faith was when I was in college. I was about to graduate, and my, what were they called? Essentially, like counselors, people that would tell you, how to progress through your degree or how to move on in your career. Um, he came to me and he said, you have one course that you need to take. You can actually test out of it. So you can either test out of Intro to World Religions or Intro to Business Ethics. You pick. And I said, oh, well, I guess Intro to World Religions would be fine. And he just stood there stumped. And he was like, why? He said, I have to tell you, I'm really confused because every single one of your classmates chose Intro to Business Ethics. And I said, well, I know how to be ethical. I don't know anything about world religions. That was kept from me. And he was like, all right, so you're in school to learn. And I said, exactly. So when I started to study for that test, I began to draw lines to all of the parallels that all of these different philosophies and theologies actually were, in my opinion, saying the same thing, just with different words. And in fact, some of those theologies or philosophies made more sense to me than Christianity did. And so I voiced that opinion to my mother, and she refused to speak to me for the next, I think it was like 6 weeks or something.
Wow.
Like completely cut me off. And so that was probably my first moment of questioning my faith. Since then, the evolution has been up and down. It has been fraught with tons of people pleasing. During my mom's passing in 2008, it was another area where I was just like, I'm just going to walk away from all of it. None of this makes any sense to me logically. Like my heart just tells me something isn't quite right. Not to say it's wrong, but for me, it just didn't make sense. And then she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And at that moment, I decided to please my mom. I couldn't have her pass away thinking that her daughter wasn't, going to be saved for all eternity. I thought that was cruel. So I became the person that my mother needed me to be at her passing. And so it's been a road of very much, up and down and up and down and up and down. And finally to the point where I am now, where I told my dad this past weekend, I said, I just don't believe the same way you do. It's not to say that I believe you're wrong. I believe that you believe what you believe. And I also believe that's okay. And I also believe that what I believe is okay. Now, that's where we probably differ, but that's where the conversation ends. And I drew that boundary and he understood. And we started talking about basketball.
That's awesome that you've been able to, reconnect and find a way to hold the boundaries, but still have your family. Because I know that's not the situation with a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tired of overpriced energy drinks full of junk? Same. That's why I use Babella, a self-carbonating hydration packet that gives you clean energy, electrolytes, and vitamins without the crash. Just add water, shake, and sip. It's way more affordable than typical energy drinks and way better for you. Use code ChrissyBernal15 at checkout to get 15% off at drinkbabello.com. Hydration just got an upgrade.
You said earlier about the whole ethics thing, which I know one of the things you've talked about in the past is ethical influencing.
Mhm.
And I think that's a super interesting concept because there's a major trust recession right now and people just don't trust anything.
Mhm.
And so that ethical influencing, I love that phrase because we're all influencing,
Yeah,
whether we
absolutely.
try or not. And so I feel like I'd love for you to expand on what you mean by that.
Yeah, for sure. So, like you said, Chrissy, we are all influencers. In fact, I work for a company now who trains new employees when they come into the company, and they refer to us as influencers because we all are. We are the first influencer, rather, that these new hires see and experience. So we all are influencing, whether it's your family or whether it's your close circle of friends or whether it's 123 million people on Instagram. We just are. Now, how you manage that influence, I think, is kind of parallel with your life, right? So for me, I don't promote any products that either don't align with my values or that I don't personally use and love. So there are a few that I just absolutely promote to anybody who's in business. For me, Dripify is an amazing tool that um, it basically pairs LinkedIn to an AI bot, right? But you create the conversation, and it's all about human centric connection. And it really genuinely opens a conversation. And I had people in my DMs through LinkedIn just by using that tool. Another one that I love to promote is Termageddon. It's a woman-owned business that creates and generates privacy policies.
Oh,
So,
I forgot about that
yeah,
one. That's a good one.
yeah, it just connects to your website. I know her personally. She is on the e-policy committee of the American Bar Association. So she's got her fingers in all of the right buckets to know what's going on. So it's not just that it's a woman-owned business. She's intelligent. She's connected. She knows what's going on. She's ethical. We share a lot of the same values. So ethical influencing is influencing for companies or products that align with you in some way so that people just trust you, right? So show up, just be who you are online. When you show up as you are, you draw the right audience. That audience is going to connect with you probably for the reasons that you're sharing about yourself, right? And then when you offer a product or a service that aligns with you and your audience, they're more likely to buy. People can tell energy, whether it's authentic or whether it's fake. They can tell whether you're promoting that water bottle because they're paying you $5,000 per post or whether you really like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
There were actually some influencers recently who had some lawsuits come up against them for that
yeah,
very thing. Um, Now, I don't know how the lawsuits ended up, but I mean, regardless, who wants to deal with a lawsuit?
yeah, exactly.
And the values alignment is, I think, really huge right now too, because everyone, we're watching our money. We want to know that what we do with our money is not going to go towards something that we don't want to support. But when it comes to personal brands, sometimes I think people maybe struggle with figuring out what their actual values are.
Mhm.
And I know you and I met years ago, and I thought I had my values lined up, but then I was like, wait, they're not as buttoned up as I thought they were. They are now, but
Yeah.
they weren't then. So, what's the piece of advice when somebody's trying to get started on figuring out what their
Their
actual
values
values
are.
are? Yeah, like
Yeah.
defining them.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you're going as a company, right? So if you're a solopreneur and you're running, like you're literally the brand, you have no team, you don't have any big vision, you just are doing this to earn a paycheck. Just be yourself. I would say list your probably top 4 or 5 values. What is important to you? Try to circle in the brand. Why is it important to you as a brand? If we expand into a little bit larger company, anywhere between 2 to 10 employees, or larger, really, at this point, what we really want to consider is what are your values as a person? What are your customers' values? And where do those two overlap? And then we have a third kind of circle in there, which what is your company values? Is it sustainability? Why? Right. So, really getting clear on what those values are, why it's important to identify them specifically for your brand. How is your brand going to personify these values? Because whether you have a personal brand or not, your brand can still personify, right? So it has its own image, and it has its own reputation, which, quite frankly, is very easily
Dampened
tainted.
for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
we actually saw that recently with Simone Biles. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody is like, what is happening here?
Right.
That's not the America's girl that, whoa, it's like, what is
Yeah,
happening?
exactly.
And aside from the trans conversation, but just the body shaming part
Yeah.
that she did, people are like, whoa, that doesn't seem like Simone. So, it's like, I said to my husband whenever that came out, I was like, whew, I'm glad I'm not her publicist right now.
Well,
Well,
that I kept my mouth shut.
like, woo, yeah. And, and that also goes to show that, like, anything you say online, it can
Absolutely.
come to haunt you. But, that's where having your values clearly defined
Yeah.
can help you, because you can look at a post that you're going to post and go, does this align with my values? Is it in
Right.
my bucket? If not, zip.
Yeah. And I think right now, especially, and I'm not going to get controversial when I say this, but because of the political
Landscape.
division that exists in our country and the world, quite frankly, um, I think people feel like they have to choose a person to get behind and rally behind. Um, that person is just as fallible as you or I. Let's just keep it real. So they can and they may fall. So, what is important is the values that made you vote for that person. It's not the person, it's the values that made you decide this is the person that I'm going to rally behind. Forget the person's name. If you want to get away from, potentially damaging your brand, there is absolutely no shame. And I would say it's probably the smarter choice to use your voice to promote the change that you want to see rather than to fight against what you don't want.
Yeah, I'm very much in the camp of focus on the positive, put your energy toward the positive, toward, like they say, be the change you want to see.
Exactly.
I find that to be so much more effective in
100%.
getting things done. If in the past, if I've seen something wrong, like with the Equal Restroom Act for Little People movement that I started years ago, saw something wrong. And instead of complaining about it, we said, here's a solution. Let's go show everybody. Here's the
Right.
solution.
Yeah, exactly.
And we affected change quite easily. I mean, honestly, change happened. It's like once people realized, oh, that is a problem, you've got a pretty easy solution to implement. Here we go. Great. So I know we kind of got off on a little tangent, but that's one reason I like these kind of conversations. Yes, I had some questions already lined up, but we've blown past some of them, uh, and that's okay. So talking about finding your voice and kind of finding your purpose, it's more than just a personal journey, and I wanted to talk about the intersection of personal journey and business there. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it was like the writing of the book was very much a personal journey. And it also started out as a business, I won't say opportunity, but it did connect very closely with my business, because I am such a staunch supporter of women-owned businesses specifically. And so helping women find who they are and use their voice. So my business has changed pretty drastically, from the time that I started writing the book until now. Even though I work for an employer, I love my job. And I find that when you do what you love, you really don't work a day in your life. And I am still able to work my own business as well, which is beautiful. So, how I support those women that I was writing for in that book, other than myself, was to help them find their voice. So that's really where it intersects, Chrissy, is so many women are searching, flailing, really. They don't even know how to start to find their voice. And honestly, I tripped over every pebble on the way to find my voice, and I still found it. And I can help you trip over your pebbles too.
You can hold their hand as they trip, and that way they
Right,
don't clue as well.
exactly. So no, how I show up for women now, whether you're a business owner or a mom or anybody really who works any kind of job, it's how important is it? How vital is it that you step into who you truly are outside of anything that society tells you to be, outside of who your family tells you to be, and outside of who your husband or your wife tells you to be? It's okay to just find out who you are, because in finding out who you are is how you step into pure joy. That is how you bring about the life that you want to live, is finding joy in whatever you're doing. And if you're living a life where you're constantly masking who you are, I promise you, you are not living a joy.
No, you're so right. And I know you and I had a conversation, a couple months ago, and you were asking me, what am I doing to find joy? And I was super stressed at the time, and I was like, crap, I like to sing, and I haven't been singing lately.
Yeah.
And so it's like I just started to sing again, and just to myself. I don't sing like I know everybody always asks that because Sierra's a singer, and they're like, "Well, where
Yeah.
did you get your voice from?" Well, I was a singer, but that whole in the shadows thing, like I could not get on stage to sing right now and probably to save my life. But I love singing. So I'll sing to myself, sing to my plants or whatever. But s- when you say this joy and like these little things being who you really are, and this is a silly thing, but I have wanted a snake plant for months now. Silly, silly snake plant.
It's
And
not really.
I've looked, well, and I just wanted a snake. I just wanted a snake plant. And so I looked at Home Depot, Lowe's. I had looked so many places. And then finally this weekend, I found one. And I am not even kidding. As I was walking out of the garden center, I was like, like, I got a snake plant. I got a snake plant. And I was like,
Love that.
that is so silly, but I just felt so good about a stinking snake plant. And I
I
was like,
would just sidebar, I would look up the energy of a snake plant to see how that supports you.
interesting. Okay, I will. I got it initially because of the mold aspect, because of all of my health issues I've been dealing with. So I wanted one in my office.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I will look that up for sure. But so I've been talking to it, but just that joy of silly little snake plant, and it felt so good, and I was like, this is the way it should be, where I can just feel good about a silly snake plant.
Absolutely. It's so funny because when I do meet with my clients, I speak about joy so frequently because I want it to be top of mind for everyone that I work with. And they'll be like, I know, does it bring you joy? All right.
That's
It's
funny.
vitally important.
And I know Marie Kondo got like the whole does it bring you joy thing. And I get the concept behind that. Although I can't like look at this mouse and go, does it bring me joy? No, I'm going to get rid
Right.
of it. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's a little simplified on
Yeah.
that. But no, exactly like that little plant or, I'm not even kidding. I will skip just for the heck of skipping. The other day, I was in the grocery store parking lot and decided to just hop on the cart and push myself.
I love that. I love that because I mean, let's just be real. Who do you know that can skip without smiling?
Exactly. It's impossible. It's
It's totally
impossible.
impossible.
And it's funny because Sienna, she's 26, but she's special needs, and so I'll do these things with her, and she might find them silly, but not silly, if that makes sense at all. And I actually see that whenever we go to any of the events where there are all of her special needs peers there,
Mhm.
they might do things that we would look and go, "Oh gosh, I could never do that." Yet they are in complete and utter bliss and joy.
Absolutely.
And I look at them as they dance and sing, and I'm like, why can't we just, I don't care what you think of me. I'm having a good time.
Right, exactly. And that's just it. I think that's the people that I envy the most. I follow quite a few people on Instagram. So they are my influencers who dress the funkiest, who have the craziest hair, who don't give a flip about what you think of them. They are truly just happy being themselves. And even now, like as much work as I have done, that is who I aspire to be. Just one step closer to being happier with who I am today.
I have one particular friend came in mind when you said that, and she has always worn just loud clothing, or her hair is always doing something cool. And if I were to try and pull that off, oh my gosh, I would probably look crazy. But she's got the inner, I guess, workings
Yes.
that just when you look at it, you're like, yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Exactly.
And she's such a joyful spirit. She's actually, I think we're recording in a couple weeks, so I can't wait for her to share her story as well. But yeah, the whole finding your voice, and I guess I know we're coming close to time, but when it comes to finding your voice, what do you think that means for people? Because I feel like some people are like, I don't even know what you mean by finding my voice.
Yeah. So, really finding your voice is number one, finding who you are. And that's not a destination, it's a journey.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And so, in the book, I wrote about a girl who I reached out to because she had lost some weight. And I didn't want to approach her and be like, how'd you lose weight? Because she was a cancer survivor. And I didn't want the answer to be, I relapsed. Um, and so I very carefully asked her, how she dropped the weight with precision. And she responded back with one word. And she said, meditation.
Interesting.
And I said, meditation. All right. I mean, if I'll drop 100 pounds and just by meditating, I mean, sign me up. Little did I know that one single word would take me on a trip to find who I am. And that trip would allow me to fall in love with the spirit that this body inhabits. Um, and in doing so, in finding that love for myself, when you truly love yourself, when you truly love someone else, let me make this easier for everybody to understand. When you truly love someone else, do you silence them or do you let their voice be heard? That's the journey to self love.
I love that. And you can think of it as a parent, would you ever want somebody else telling your kid to shut up?
Yeah.
No, you wouldn't.
Exactly. And it's being that person. It's being that parent sometimes. If you weren't parented the way that you needed to be parented, it's reparenting yourself, and learning to love yourself enough to allow that voice to be heard. And that's incremental. It's as you find that bravery, it's as you find that little bit of love for yourself, it just grows over time, again and again and again, until you are so bright, you can't be hidden.
It makes me think. So, growing up, they would always say, oh, God loves you so much and, you should see yourself like he does. And it never really clicked to me just to hear it like that. But hearing you say it, like that, it's like, oh, okay. So, God is a parent it's the same as we look at our children. And so we need to look at ourselves like that as well. So
Absolutely.
I like the way you say that. Well, is there anything you want to leave the audience with? I feel like our time has flown by, but is there any last note you want to leave the audience with?
I would just say, if you have any questions about how do you find this like radical self-acceptance, this radical self-love, um, there are a number of people that you could reach out to connect with, but I am one of those. So if you connected with me during, this time in conversation, I would love to have a conversation with you about helping you on your journey to find yourself, to love yourself, to use your voice, because it is such a relevant quote for what we're talking about here. Um, so Marianne Williamson wrote it's part of a book called A Course in Miracles. She says, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us most. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that's within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. So that is how I would leave you.
I love that. Yeah. I mean,
Like withholding the gift of you is depriving others. So find your most authentic self and let her shine.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. And I 100% get that because that was during one of my meditations. Something that came to me was you've got this big vision of how to help all these people. You're never going to do that if you continue playing as small as you are. And so by playing small, you're being selfish. And that was just like a smack that I needed. And here we are on the podcast.
Right.
And all the other things I have planned.
I
But
love it.
and how can people get in touch with you?
The best way is to just email me. It's Amber, AMBER, at Powers, POWERS, digital, DIGITAL, marketing.com. I do have a very strong marketing background. I still take on a few clients for that, but it's not my sole work, but that is where you will find me.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll make sure we put it in the show notes as well. And your other socials
Yeah.
if you want.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest on here. I couldn't have, imagined you not being on here. So,
Thanks for inviting me, Chrissy.
I wasn't going to let you say no, really. Kind of a rhetorical question when I asked. Right. So thank you again so much. And I hope this at least touched a few souls. I'm sure it did. And we will see y'all next time on Finally Seen.